Okay, great. So, welcome. Today is Wednesday, March 24th, and we are in a now probably very serious pre-Pesach mode as everyone gets ready and cleans and cooks. I hope everyone has nice plans for Pesach, and it's certainly going to be a different Pesach this year than it was last year. Uh, Thankfully, I hope for many of us. And hopefully this class will provide everyone some food for thought, some Divrei Torah at the Seder. So in my emails about this, I suggested that everyone bring pen and paper so they could write stuff down. But I'm also shared my screen just now. And so you should have on your screen the Divrei Torah in written out form, which I will share in the UOS Pesach portal right when we're done. The UOS Pesach portal is accessible through the UOS website. You just go onto the UOS website and you'll see that there is a picture, a Pesach picture. Just click on that. All of the stuff for Pesach, all the kids programs and the flyers and the selling chametz and moschitim, etc. Okay, so we have one Dvar Torah for every step of the Seder. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to spare you singing the steps of the Seder. I did record those today because someone in the shul asked me to record some of the more common and well-known or popular parts of the Seder. So I did those, and those are also on the Pesach portal. So if you want to listen to me sing, then you're welcome to go see those, to go listen to those. So Kadesh, the first part of the Seder. So we have a decision has to be made when it comes to which bracha do we make first at the Seder. Do we make the bracha over the wine, which accompanies every Kiddush that we make, Shabbat or Yom Tov, or do we make the bracha over the Kiddush Hayom, sanctifying the day? And what we do is first we say Borei Pri Hagafen, and then we say the bracha wherein we sanctify the day, right? That bracha of sanctifying the day goes like this: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'am v'romanu mikol hashon v'kidashanu mitzvotav. Right? If that may sound familiar, when we talk about God choosing us and giving us Vatitein lanu Hashem Elokeinu bi'ahava moedim l'simcha, that God gave us out of great love all of the holidays. So that comes second. The Talmud talks about this decision. Why is one first? Someone has to go first, but why is the bracha over the wine first? So the answer is we have a general principle in halacha called tadir v'she'eno tadir, tadir kodem. It's a very, very important rule that when you have to do two things, this rule applies when both can be done. When both cannot be done, then this rule doesn't necessarily always apply, but when both can be done, the one you do first is the one that is more common. Tadir means more frequently occurring or more common. So tadir v'she'eno tadir, when you have to make a decision between something which is common or frequent and something which is less common or less frequent, tadir kodem. First, we do the one which is more common first. So the question is why? So I saw a very beautiful idea in the Haggadah of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. He's known as the Sridei Eish. He was a very, very influential rabbi. He managed to survive the Shoah and get out of Europe. Ended up in Montreux, Switzerland, where he lived the rest of his life. And he wrote the collection of Shelot Utshuvot, as well as a Haggadah, as well as a collection of essays, as well as commentaries on the Talmud. And he says that what stands behind this idea, the reason why Tadir Kodem, the reason why what is more common first, is because Judaism is really built on consistency. And Judaism is built on the daily things that we have to do to express ourselves as Jews, right? Life has the things which come our daily responsibilities, and then there are the one-time exhilarating events, exciting events. Exciting events are just that. They're exciting and they're wonderful, but they don't sustain us. What sustains us individually, as families, certainly in a religion, are the things that we do on a routine basis. So that is why, according to Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, the Tadir Kodem. First, we do the things which are more frequent because we're making a value statement, right? That those things which express our regular commitments come first. You know, in a marriage, this is something which is especially true. And in fact, in his commentary, I didn't give it all to you. In his commentary, he talks also about this notion that in a marriage, right, the regular daily acts of kindness and things that spouses and partners do for each other, that's what sustains a married life. Of course, anniversaries and birthdays are wonderful, but it's easy to be nice and thoughtful on a birthday and an anniversary, but it's the consistency that matters. On the other hand, consistency sometimes feels like it's routine. So we have to, from time to time, inject that consistency with a little zest and with a little freshness. And that's exactly what we have. And so that's where the Chagim come along and other less frequent events come along to give us a boost of spirituality. And it actually works that way, right? We sometimes feel after the Chagim like a special boost, especially after the Yamim Noraim. So we start with the common, but then we talk about the uncommon, and that gives us hopefully the right balance. I also think it's interesting to note that Pesach, the Seder, is maybe one of the best known highlights of those individual type of events. And we start the Seder, we start that event by reminding ourselves that event is wonderful, but it's not really the sustaining aspect of Judaism. What's the sustaining aspect of Judaism is the simple Borei Pri Hagafen, the simple bracha that comes all the time, over and over and over again. And after we do that, then we're going to talk about some of the exhilarating and exciting stuff. I'll just end with a note that Rav Amital from Yeshiva Har Etzion was fond of talking about. There's a midrash that asks, what is the most important pasuk in the Torah? One suggestion is Shema, which is a good suggestion. It talks about Kabbalat Omachut Shamayim, right? It talks about accepting God. Another suggestion is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, which is love your neighbor as yourself. That's also a huge concept. And another concept is the psukim, the verses that talk about the daily sacrifices. And the conclusion of the Gemara is that's the winner, right? The one that talks about the daily sacrifices, again, this idea of consistency, that's the most important thing. And it's so true in all areas of life, and it's true in Judaism as well. That is the Dvar Torah for Kadesh. Next, Orchatz. Strange custom. We wash our hands. We don't make a bracha. We're not going to eat bread. Normally, we only wash our hands when we eat bread. But there is a tradition, there is a halacha, that food that is dipped in certain liquids, one has to wash their hands beforehand. We only practice this on Pesach. Why is that? So according to the Aruch HaShulchan, we do this in order to arouse the curiosity of the children, which is a great answer. And it is an acceptable answer to any question at the Seder. Why do we do this? So the children will ask, right? Why do we do X? So the children will ask. Why is Zaidi sleeping in his soup? So the children will ask. So that's a good answer, and it works. However, there are other answers. Another answer is that we do this in order to highlight the sanctity of the night, meaning washing hands for any food dipped in liquid brings on and harkens back to the way the Kohanim would operate in the Beit HaMikdash and the way that we used to operate when we were more concerned with things like Tuma and Tara, like sanctity. And so we do that also to raise the level. We do a lot of things on Pesach, which we normally don't do. The rules of kashrut are especially strict on Pesach, right? Even the smallest amount of chametz makes something not kosher to Pesach. There's no rules of batel b'shishim, of nullification, and other stricter rules regarding chametz. So we do a lot of things over Pesach that indicate that we're trying to reach a higher level of sanctity. And so we wash our hands also to symbolize our desire to do that as well. So that washing our hands, which doesn't have a bracha, gives us that ability to aspire to greater sanctity. And we could look at the Seder as something more than the story, but it's also an opportunity to achieve a degree of sanctity. Okay. If anyone has any questions, by the way, as we're going, feel free to use the raise hand function or to put something in the chat. Okay. Next, karpas. Why do we begin the Seder with a small taste of vegetables? Why not go right to the meal? Right. That's the short version of the Seder. Is they tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Right. That doesn't quite fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim. But that's the question here. Why are we sort of teasing ourselves with a little parsley or celery or whatever it is that we use for karpas? Why not just go right to the meal? So it's true, we will eventually get to the meal, but the meal is not the point. The meal is almost like a celebration of the point. The point is all the miracles and all the wonders that God did for us to take us out of Mitzrayim, to make us thankful and to express thanks. And we have to do that first, right? We have to first talk about the miracles, and then we have to express thanks. So really, the karpas becomes almost like a training module. We start to eat, and then we say, wait, stop. Just when you thought the most important thing of the night was eating, we're going to tease you and make you stop eating so that you could realize that that's not really the most important thing. The most important thing is the telling of the story and the praising of God, which then leads to a Thanksgiving meal, right? There are lots of types of meals. A meal we have in halachic terminology is a sudat hoda'ah. And in many ways, the meal, which is a Thanksgiving meal, in many ways, the meal that we have at the Seder is a sudat hoda'ah. And so before we could do a sudat hoda'ah, we have to know what we're grateful and thankful for. So we stop eating to starkly remind ourselves of that reality. Okay, moving right along. Yachatz, we break the middle matzah. So again, the question here is, why do we break the matzah? The matzah represents the food of redemption, right? It's the food that we ate when we were leaving. Why do we break it? Which seems to be antithetical to the celebration of redemption. So I saw in the Haggadah commentary written by Erica Brown, a really beautiful idea. First of all, we know that matzah is fragile, right? How many times have you opened up your matzah box and found that many of the pieces are broken, right? It's a terrible letdown, but it's also a reminder of something important. And that is that, in a sense, we all have broken parts. We all have things about our life which we wish were different. We all have things about maybe our personality that we think we're different, that we're working on. We all have relationships which we wish were better and improved. Right? Life is like a matzah, right? It's very rarely whole. Sounds like a Snoopy's thing. Life is like a matzah, right? It's very rarely whole. It's very rarely perfect. There's a lot of pain and disappointment. But at the end of the day, even though we break the matzah, we're still at the table. Bnei Yisrael still got out of Mitzrayim. We're still able to celebrate. So we break the matzah and still celebrate, to make the point that even though times can be challenging, we can still rise above them, and we can find things to be happy about. I quoted Rav Amital before, but I'd like to quote him again. He says something very powerful about that regarding the state of Israel and Yom Ha'atzmaut. This happened especially after the disengagement from Gaza, where some people said, I'm not going to say the prayer for the state of Israel anymore. I'm not going to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut anymore. He said, since when is Judaism about perfection? Right? Since when is Judaism about only accepting what's perfect and only being happy when things are perfect? A great example of this is Purim. Right? The Gemara says, after Purim, why is there no Hallel on Purim? Because after Purim, we were still slaves to Achashverosh. Okay, we don't have Hallel, but we still celebrate on Purim. And it could be that the Megillah, according to another position in the Gemara, that the Megillah is in fact Hallel. So even though we were stuck in Persia, there was still a lot to celebrate. So Judaism does not ask us to wait for perfection to be happy. If we waited for perfection to be happy, we have much fewer times to be happy. And I added that I think this year it's especially powerful to think about this, because we've all missed things over the last year, whether people passed away from COVID, or celebrations were missed, or just time went by, or opportunities that we thought we were going to have were lost because of COVID. We could still find things to celebrate about, and we should try on Pesach. We should say Hallel, wholeheartedly on Pesach, even though things are not necessarily as good as we want. And I something else I mentioned on Shabbat Haggadah, which I really been thinking about a lot. I really think that we are right now living through a period of Geula, living through a period of redemption. As the country slowly crawls out of the COVID malaise, as more and more people become vaccinated, and more vaccinations are produced, and the numbers of sick and the number of dying continue to decrease. I think this is the very definition of Geula, right? The world, we are experiencing a moment of redemption. So we should celebrate that wholeheartedly, even as we are able and really need to look back over the last year and fully understand, appreciate, admit, and recognize what was lost. We have to hold both of these things in our mind at the same time. That's really a Jewish response. A Jewish response is being able to hold both of these seemingly dueling ideas at the same time. That is Yachatz. Life is a little broken, but we still celebrate. Okay, Magid. I talked about this a little bit today in my weekly shiur. What is the difference between the daily mitzvah of remembering Yetziat Mitzrayim, which is an obligation once during the day and once at night, and the yearly mitzvah that we're going to fulfill on Motzei Shabbat and on Sunday night? The yearly obligation to tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. So Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather, noted that there are three differences. One, remembering can be accomplished with a brief mention, but telling the story requires details, right? We spend a lot of time on the details. Jillian, if you're taking a picture of the screen, you don't have to. I'm going to send this to the whole shul. I'm going to put it on the UOS portal. Okay? So don't worry about it. Unless you're taking a picture of me, in which case that's fine. So to tell the story, you require details, and the Haggadah is full of details. Remembering, we have to say, God took us out of Egypt. Number two, remembering can be accomplished privately, right? I could be at home and just say a sentence or daven to myself, and that's it. But when it comes to telling the story, ideally, we should tell to other people. The Haggadah lebincha, the Haggadah says you should tell your son, but the commentaries say it doesn't mean son specifically. Anybody who's there, you're supposed to tell the story to. Ideally, that's the nature of a story. And number three, remembering the Exodus is part of the commandment to accept the yoke of heaven, while retelling the story is a mitzvah independent of any other religious obligation, right? When I remember the story, like in the last paragraph of Shema, I say it to remember that God is in charge, as opposed to the mitzvah that we're going to fulfill on Saturday night and Sunday night. That is an independent mitzvah, free of connection to any other commandment. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Chaim's grandson, added that retelling the story of Exodus requires praise and thanks, while remembering does not. That's why the Haggadah has Hallel. While the daily mitzvah is just a mention, there's no requirement. Okay. Others add that Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim requires food props, right? Matzah, Maura, wine, and perhaps also it needs to be in a language we understand, because what good is a story being told if you don't understand it? While Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim You could say the Hebrew verse of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim without understanding it and still fulfill the mitzvah. Okay. Magid number 2. Since I didn't do motzi and matzah, I just did one for motzi matzah together. I gave 2 for Magid. I gave 3 for Magid. Okay, number 2 for Magid is the most important parts of Magid, Avadim Hayinu, and we also have to mention the Paschal sacrifice, Matzah and Maura, and explain the reason for each. That is the end of the Haggadah, where we say, Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Rabban Gamliel says, whoever does not mention Pesach, Matzah, and Maura has not fulfilled their obligation. And then we go through a paragraph describing each one. And then, of course, as we said, you have to have praise to God. There are books and articles written about the Minimal Seder. Many of those are written for Israeli soldiers, for Chayalim, who find themselves on duty on Seder night and don't have time to sit down and make a whole Seder. So this would be a minimalist Seder. And these are the obligatory parts. Okay. Why is there no mitzvah on retelling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim? Right? It's a Torah obligation. Why is there no mitzvah? So one is it's a rational commandment. We would have thought of it anyway, because God did these great miracles. Of course, we want to tell people about it. And there's a general rule that mitzvot that we would do anyway, we generally don't make brachot on. Also, the primary fulfillment of the mitzvah is in one's heart. We recite it, right, we speak it out, but it's about internalizing it. That's the primary mitzvah. We generally don't make brachot on these types of internal mitzvot. Others suggest that there is a mitzvah, there is a bracha. It's the bracha that there are a couple of times we make brachot at the Seder. We say Asher Ga'alanu at the end of the Seder. We make Kiddush before the Seder, and we have a bracha in Mariv, which also may be considered the bracha. Although that's a tough one because there's a big break and lots of talking and other things between the blessing that we say at Mariv and beginning the Haggadah, so it's hard to justify that because normally we don't like to have an interruption between the recitation of the bracha that we're going to do for a mitzvah and the mitzvah itself. In any case, that's a discussion of the brachot. Rachtzah. Why do we wash before eating? So before doing any of the avodah, the service in the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim would wash their hands. Now we no longer have the Beit HaMikdash, but we still want to do this, right? We want to do this, again, as I said before, it elevates what we're doing to divine service, right? If we do before we eat what the Kohanim used to do before they bring a karban, it's saying something about eating, right? It exalts our everyday task of eating, even our most physical things that we do. If we wash before eating, which is a very physical thing, of course, it elevates it. It shows that it is also in the service of God, right? In Judaism, we like to believe that everything we do is in the service of God, right? Even taking a nap on Shabbos is in the service of God, or taking a nap Erev Pesach is in the service of God, so that we come to the Seder relaxed and full of energy, so we don't want to rush through the Seder or fall asleep at the Seder. We like to turn all sorts of things into the service of God. So when we wash our hands and mimic the Kohanim who were doing the highest level service of God in the Beit HaMikdash, we show that what we're doing is also service of God. It also adds like a sense of sanctity to make sure we're going to treat the food and the meal and the whole atmosphere properly, right? When you wash before a meal and you turn it into an act of offering to God, maybe our whole demeanor at the table is going to change, and we're going to want to spend the time at the table engaged in higher purposes. So that's why we wash before the meal, all the more so at the Seder. We want to turn the Seder into an opportunity for great spirituality and great sanctity. Okay, Motzi Matzah, which is when we say the bracha of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz and Al Achilat Matzah. We say the bracha for the standard bracha we make for bread and the additional bracha that we make, that we're obligated to make before we eat matzah, which is an independent mitzvah. So on the one hand, matzah is lechem oni, right? It is the bread of affliction, and according to some, it was the bread that we ate while we were enslaved. because the Jews had so little time to let their dough rise because they were so busy working. So it's the poor man's bread. It's the slave bread. It only contains flour and water. It's the pauper's bread. On the other hand, matzah symbolizes our exodus from Egypt. We ate it because when we were leaving, we were also rushing out, and we had no time to let our bread, the dough rise. So we rushed out. So matzah in of itself has a mixed message: the message of aniyut, of poverty, the message of affliction, the message of being oppressed. On the other hand, it also is the message of freedom. It's the message of God's miracles. So I said before, this teaches us, we sit at the Seder, we consider the bitterness of slavery and the sweetness of redemption. Sort of a little bit of a repeat of what I said earlier. We have to do both things at the Seder. Remember the sweetness and the bitterness of redemption, the sweetness and the bitterness of our experiences over the last year. This idea of having both of these concepts at the Seder is alluded to in a Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim that says, Matchil bigenut u'misayim b'shevach. We have to start off the Seder with negative and end with positive. Seems strange if we're celebrating God and celebrating the Exodus. Why both? Because it's a more authentic experience. That's life. That's really what life is, and that's what Mitzrayim was. You have to remember, Mitzrayim was great when we were leaving, but for hundreds of years before, and it was terrible, and we can't let that slip away. Okay, that is Motzi Matzah. Maror, the bitter herbs. Many people are not aware of this halacha, but one should dip the maror in charoset to take away some of the edge. The question is, again, why? Why am I downplaying the bitterness of Mitzrayim by sweetening it with charoset? And additionally, the Mishnah Berurah says that you could recline at the Seder while you're eating maror. I understand reclining for matzah, which has a freedom aspect. I understand reclining for wine, which has a nobility aspect. But why would I possibly recline to show how much I'm enjoying this and the symbol of freedom if it's maror? It's the very symbol of bitterness. So this answer comes from a Haggadah called Hegyonei Halacha by Rabbi Mirsky. And he says the bitterness of the slavery contributed to a quicker redemption. The Egyptians were so cruel that the period of exile and slavery was shortened from the originally planned 400 years. So the bitterness of slavery, because it was so bad, and that is represented by maror, is partially responsible for the early redemption. So we are permitted to lean while eating the maror and to dilute the sharpness with the, with the charoset. This is a deep message. Within the negative is the positive, which we've probably seen in our life. We think we're going through something really, really terrible and really, really hard. And at the time it is, and we shouldn't downplay that. Yet, it may lead us to greater heights, greater success, greater realizations of our strengths, greater realizations of our abilities. Sometimes within the maror is the redemption. Sometimes within the exile is the redemption itself. Not that we want the exile. We have to be able to say that too. We don't want to, fool ourselves. But sometimes there is something positive that could potentially come from it. Okay. Here we go. Next, korech. What does the sandwich of matzah and maror represent? The answer is compromise. There's a dispute in the Talmud whether matzah and maror need to be eaten separately or together. According to the rabbis, separately. According to Hillel, together. So what do? We do both. First, we eat matzah, and then we eat maror separately from each other. And then we have the korech, which is the sandwich, where we mix matzah and maror. reminding us that compromise is good. Now, this is a unique type of compromise where we're able to do both. When that's possible, that is often a great idea. Not always possible. We shouldn't have a Pollyannish idea about compromise. It's not always possible, but sometimes with a little kvetch and a little flexibility and a little willingness, everyone can get 90% of what they want, 85% of what they want. The rabbis didn't get everything they want because we do eat the matzah and the Maura together. And Hillel didn't get everything he wants at the Seder because we eat it separately, but they each got most of what they wanted. So maybe this is a little bit of a message of compromise. Now, making everyone happy is a little bit of a pipe dream. Again, it's not always possible. Maybe it's not even possible most of the time, but we should give it a shot. We should try, and if we can't succeed, at least we've given it a try. Is compromise the highest value? No, I don't think so. I'm not sure in Judaism we could say that really anything is the highest value, because Judaism doesn't operate that way. But this is a important value, and we should remember when we're eating our crumbly and crummy Hillel sandwich at the Seder, and it's getting all over our lap and the table. Those are crumbs of compromise, and maybe we'll just pay careful attention to that. Okay, that is korech. Shulchan orech, the strangest, in my view, the strangest part of the Seder, because we understand that every other part of the Seder is ritual. Kiddush, matzah, maror, karpas. These are things which are ritual, but this is just a meal, Shulchan Orech. Why is it part of the song? Right? Why is it part of the steps of the Seder? It should just be dinner. Why is it part of the steps of the Seder? So Rabbi Shmuel Golden came out with a really wonderful Haggadah called Unlocking the Haggadah. And he suggests the following. He says, first we have all the rituals and all the passages in the Haggadah, and we recite those before the meal. He says that focuses on the past. And if you pay attention to the Haggadah, it's true, it's all about the past. And if you pay attention to what happens after the Haggadah, after the meal, about Hallel, that's about the future, about the third Beit HaMikdash, and about the Mashiach, that's about the future. The meal represents the present, the here and now. And it's an invitation to look around the table and just be appreciative of the here and now, right? A lot of times in life, we spend time thinking about what was and what will be or what could be. We don't spend enough time thinking about the blessings that are in our life right now. And that's why Shulchan Orech, that's why this meal in the scheme of the Seder is almost ritualized. Just the meal is a ritual. The first half of the Seder, there are three parts of the Seder, let's say. The first part of the Seder is about the past. The third part of the Seder is about the future. But the second part of the Seder, the meal, it's about the here and now, about being grateful for what is around the table. I was also from Erica Brown's Haggadah, Rabbi Shmuel Golden's Haggadah. And so we turn the meal into that religious obligation of being thankful for what we have in our life right now. Tzafun, we normally is when we eat the afikomen. But the Gemara has another explanation of what afikomen means about ein maftirin achara pesach afikomen, which the Gemara says, one opinion means do not go from group to group, right? Stay within the same group when eating the Karban Pesach. This is a very powerful idea. It talks about attention span and about looking people in the eye and giving people time, giving your relationships time, giving time to get to know each other, giving time to spend uninterrupted quality time with each other. That's what Safun, the message is. When the Gemara said it means you're not supposed to jump from group to group, stay with the group you are. it's not necessarily going to be better with the next group. It's not going to be more exciting with the next group. It's going to be new, but it's going to be not as deep. The more time we spend with people, the more we get to know them, the more we appreciate them, the more they get to know us, the more they appreciate us. So we stick with the group until the meal is over. It trains us to enjoy the people we are currently with. A few years ago, I was in a cafe in New York. There was a couple that came in. They looked like they were married, and looked like they were going for breakfast together. I thought to myself, how sweet. This couple makes time for each other to go to breakfast together, and they sat down at the table, and the whole time they were each on their cell phone, not talking to each other at all. Now, I don't want to judge. Maybe that's the best they can do, and maybe they were both very busy that morning and they had work to do. So they said, let's just at least do it together over a cup of coffee and a blueberry muffin. Okay, that's wonderful. But the message, the image in my mind was that sometimes we don't spend and focus on the people we're currently with. We're always looking for what's the next interaction going to be. And Safun teaches us to really soak in quality time. So I wish everyone a very, very long Seder with lots of wonderful and thoughtful and deep conversations where we really become acquainted and get to know each other on the deepest level. Okay, Barech, Birkat HaMazon. Birkat HaMazon, of course, is part of every meal that we eat bread, but on Pesach, it has special significance. First of all, it serves as the introduction or the cup that we use for the Birkat HaMazon is the third cup of the Seder. So the attachment of the cup to Birkat HaMazon gives Birkat HaMazon a level of great significance. Our general feelings of gratitude for food, the land of Israel, and the Torah are heightened also by the feelings of gratitude that we are experiencing because we just finished retelling the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus from Egypt. So Birkat HaMazon gets elevated not only because of the cup, it gets elevated because since Birkat HaMazon is essentially praise and thanksgiving to God for a bunch of things, our antenna, our receptors are much more honed in and sensitive to things we should be grateful for on this night than perhaps on any other night. So Birkat HaMazon also takes on that heightened sensitivity. It's also important to note that there's a risk. We understand why we say brachot before we eat, but Judaism we have a bracha after we eat. Right, saying a bracha before we eat, we're so hungry, we're asking God for food, but after we've eaten, we're satiated and we don't even think about God because we don't need him anymore. We're full. So Birkat HaMazon is the Jewish response to that. No, even after we're satiated, even after we've been satisfied, we still have to take a moment to thank God. This reminds me of one of my funniest jokes, one of my favorite jokes. I'm not sure if it's funny, it's my favorite, where this person is in Manhattan and she's late for a meeting. And she can't find the parking spot and she keeps circling the blocks and her radius keeps getting bigger and bigger and she keeps making promises to God. God, I promise if you find me a spot now, I'm going to give $100 to tzedakah. And every time she rolls around the block, it's another 100. So it's up to 200, 300, finally it's up to $1,000. She turns the corner, and as she turns the corner, someone pulls out of a spot. She pulls into the spot, and she says, "It's okay, God, I found it myself." Right? So we have to not trick ourselves into that we found it ourselves. You're going to write that down, Ellie? That's a good one. Yeah, okay. Birkat HaMazon reminds us we have to thank God even after we find our food. Okay, next, Hallel. Hallel. First of all, we noted that Rabbi Soloveitchik said that in order to fulfill the mitzvah of secrecy of Mitzrayim, there must be Hallel. But here, this is a little bit of a lengthy one, but it's so beautiful. Instead of just typing it, I just took a picture of it and put it in. So Hallel, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, if we look at the various chapters that make up Hallel, The first two are thanksgiving, and those are the first two which make part of the Magid. They're the end of the Magid. So the first two are all thanksgiving, and there's only praise. There's no petition or request. We just speak about the past events and the events which we thank God for. That's the beginning of the Seder, the beginning of the Hallel. However, later on, we get into petition. The Psalms from Lo Lanu through Ahavti, Min HaMetzar, and Ana Hashem, which are 115 through 118, the end of Hallel, are very different, Rabbi Soloveitchik says. They talk about petition. There is praise, but there's a lot of petition. We do not find praise alone in these sections. It's praise plus petition. Hallel at the Seder was divided into two components, Rabbi Soloveitchik says. The element of petition was not introduced in the beginning, because the beginning, it's all about Hallel. It's all about praising God. We're almost wiping. It's almost a little bit antithetical to what I said before. We're wiping out entirely any need that we have. We don't want to ask God for anything. We want to be completely focused on the Hallel. And then we get to requests. And Rabbi Soloveitchik here says something beautiful. We forget for a while that after Yetziat Mitzrayim, we went through many more experiences. And not all those historical experiences were pleasant. We were slaves quite a number of times, perhaps even under conditions much worse than those that prevailed in Egypt. We offered up millions of sacrifices there was much blood and much martyrdom. We forget all about this and offer only praise. Not so with the subsequent chapters of Hallel. The ones recited over the fourth cup. True, there was an outcry of joy, the shouting of the happy person, but the very instant we achieve the height of bliss and joyousness, we feel how unhappy and insecure we are. And so we ask God for things. Ana Hashem Hoshiana, Ana Hashem Atzlichana, right? Save us, give us success. We recite Hallel over the fourth cup, not as praise, but as tefillah, as Rabbi Soloveitchik says, as a way of praying, of asking God for things. And so we have two aspects of Hallel. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik says, Chazal, the rabbis chose those psalms for each section because the fourth cup is not related to Yetziat Mitzrayim, rather is related to the final act of redemption that will usher in the Messianic area, when the Geula, our redemption, will be complete, when all promises will be consummated and all pledges on the part of God fulfilled. That is why these psalms do not consist of pure praise, but rather include a mixture of praise, petition, joy and fear, happiness and distress. The beginning of the Seder is all happiness. The end of the Seder is a little bit of a mix of happiness and distress and nervous anticipation. And so we request that the future be a good one. That's how Hallel is broken up at the Seder. And finally, Nirtzah. Nirtzah, really at this point, the Seder is over. But we add a number of songs, piyutim, liturgical poems and liturgical songs, and other types of songs. And the reason we do this is the word Nirtzah has the same root as the word Ratzon, which means acceptance. Really what we're asking God at this point is this. We've gone through all these rituals, but the question is, are the rituals acceptable to you, God? Now, why wouldn't they be acceptable? Well, they wouldn't be acceptable if they were just rituals. If we didn't let them, and if we didn't internalize them, if we didn't refine our character and draw closer to God by doing the rituals. The rituals are not an end in themselves. The rituals are meant to bring us a springboard, right? To connected to God and connected to our faith and connected to other people. You should never be satisfied with the performance of the ritual just because, without thinking about what it means and without focusing on how it can change us and what the messages of the rituals are. So that's what the Seder ends with. It ends with this warning. You just went through all these rituals. Don't let them go to waste. What are the messages of the Seder? The messages of faith, the messages of hope, the messages of the importance of prayer, of Torah learning, the messages of believing that even though in every generation there have been our enemies, God manages to pull us out from their clutches. These are important lessons that we are supposed to make sink in from the Seder. And so we say Nirtza, we say, please God, I hope that all these rituals are pleasing and acceptable to you. And the reason they could be acceptable and pleasing is if we've internalized their meaning and just didn't do them by rote. So Nirtza is a perfect ending to the Seder, perfect idea that we have to internalize our ritual. When we daven, when we light Shabbos candles, we shake the lulav, we put on our tefillin, we eat kosher food. What are the underlying messages and the underlying changes in my personality and the underlying character refinement that I can get to by the fulfillment of these mitzvot? That's how we end the Seder, Nirtza. Okay, so that was it. One Dvar Torah for every step of the Seder in under an hour. Not bad. Okay, we got some questions. Don't know how this question fits in. My kids ask what proof there is that the Exodus and the slavery in Egypt happened. I don't know if there is any hard proof. It's faith. It's part of our history. It's a story that's been passed down from generation to generation. And you know what? At the end of the day, even if it's not true, I'm not sure if it matters. Right? This is the story we tell about. This is our origin story. This is the story we tell about how we got here. And again, this goes to what I said at the end. The point is to tell the story because there are inherent lessons in the story that we need to remember. And doing them this way through these rituals is a great way to remember them. We all remember our Seder. I'm sure now we're all reflecting back on our favorite Seders, where we sat, who we sat next to. I really wish my grandfather was still alive because I loved sitting at his Seder. I wish my grandmother was alive because they had very traditional roles, my grandparents, and she made the breaded veal chops, and my Zaidi read the Haggadah, right? So I miss it. We all have our favorite parts of the Seder, so we have to. That's part of our tradition, and we remember it fondly. So even if it's not true, I'm not sure it makes a difference. But I believe it is true, and it's part of our story. Okay. That's it for now. I think that's it for me until Pesach. I got no more classes. You got all my Pesach Torah so far. Any other comments or questions? If not, I will wish everyone a Zisen Pesach, a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. Thank you for joining.
I have one.
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to know, I mean, all these concepts are beautiful and they're wonderful for adult conversation. How do you keep the kids interested in the Jewish philosophy of all this?
Okay, good question. Before I answer that question, I'm putting the link to the sheet that I just shared with everyone in the chat. So if you want to print it out for your Seder, feel free to click on the link. It should open. And then you can have it for your Seder. I'm also going to put it on the portal, like I said. Okay. It's different, Andrea. At any given Seder, there should be multiple Seders going on, multiple conversations going on. Conversations between the adults, conversations between the adults and the kids, conversations between the kids and the kids. These ideas may not be all of them may not be necessarily suitable for kids. Some of them are, but not necessarily all of them. And there are wonderful Haggadot that provide ideas for children's